There is a sound your phone makes that your body learns faster than your mind ever will. Not the sound itself, the same buzz, the same flash of light, but what happens beneath your ribs the instant you see a certain name attached to it. Everything reorganizes. Your breath changes shape. Your hands slow down before they speed up. And for a moment, before you even open it, you are not thinking. You are simply bracing. Most people assume this is about the message itself, the words waiting behind the glass. But if you have lived this, really lived it, you already know something stranger is true. It is rarely the first message that undoes you. The first one is almost easy. It arrives, you read it, something in you exhales, relief, hope, maybe both at once. You tell yourself the worst is over. You were right to wait. You were right to hope. And then the second one comes. And something shifts that you cannot name yet. A tightening. A flicker of dread where there should be comfort. You reread it 3 times before you understand why it feels different. And even then, you're not sure you understand it at all. Here is what I want you to sit with before we go any further. This is not coincidence. Not just your story, your particular person, your particular ache. This exact pattern, calm after the first message, unease after the second, shows up again and again, in story after story, across people who have never met each other and never will. Which means something else is happening here. Something underneath the words themselves. So the question worth asking isn't what did they say? It's why does the second message, and not the first, tell you the truth? You have read that first reply more times than you'd ever admit out loud. And if you're honest, some small part of you felt a little foolish for it, as if wanting reassurance that badly made you too much, too needy, too far gone. But look closer at what you were actually doing. You weren't spiraling for no reason. You were gathering evidence, the way anyone gathers evidence when something important is uncertain, and for a moment, that first reply gave you enough of it to breathe. Relief came in fast, warm, almost embarrassingly grateful. And then, quietly, something else arrived right behind it, an unease you didn't invite and couldn't explain, one that only surfaced once a second message came, or once it didn't. That contradiction, feeling reassured and more anxious in nearly the same breath, is not a flaw in you. It is not proof that you're irrational or too sensitive or impossible to satisfy. It is your mind holding 2 true things at once. I want to believe this is safe, and I'm not fully convinced yet. That tension has a name, and it isn't weakness, it's cognitive dissonance, the very human experience of 2 beliefs pulling against each other until more information arrives to settle them. And when it comes to people we've let close enough to matter, that search for information isn't neediness either. It's attachment doing exactly what attachment is built to do, scanning for signs of safety in the people we've made ourselves vulnerable to. Your nervous system was never trying to sabotage your peace. It was trying to protect it, quietly running its own quiet calculations in the background, checking, comparing, waiting for enough consistency to finally let its guard down. So if you've ever felt ashamed of how closely you noticed a reply, its timing, its tone, its length, let that shame go. You weren't being dramatic. You were being observant. And that observation, as uncomfortable as it feels, is about to make a lot more sense, because underneath all of it, there is a very specific psychological reason the second message carries so much more weight than the first. Every message someone sends you carries 2 layers at once, and most people only ever notice the first one. There's the content, the actual words on the screen, and then there's the pattern, the way those words repeat, or fail to repeat, over time. The content is easy to control. A single message can be shaped by guilt, by impulse, by the quiet social pressure of not wanting to seem cruel or cold. It takes very little effort to write one thoughtful line, especially when some part of a person feels they owe it to you, or to themselves, to appear caring. That's why the first message so rarely tells you anything reliable. It is, in a sense, a performance, not necessarily a dishonest one, but a curated one, the version of a person that conscious effort can produce on command. The second message is different, and this is where it gets interesting. Sustaining that same effort twice, especially without a script to follow, asks something harder of a person, because performance takes energy and energy runs out. What surfaces once that effort quietly relaxes is closer to the automatic self, the habits and instincts that don't require thought to produce. Carl Jung had a word for the parts of ourselves that operate outside conscious control, parts we rarely examine because we've never had to. He called it the shadow. Not something sinister, simply something unfiltered. The relational patterns a person falls back into the moment they stop trying to manage how they're perceived. This is why the second message tends to feel more honest than the first, even when it says less. It isn't shaped by who someone wants to be in that instant. It's shaped by who they already are when no one's watching closely enough to perform for. So if the second message is where the shadow shows itself, where effort fades and instinct takes over, the real question becomes far more specific than simply noticing that something feels different. It becomes this: what exactly is that shadow revealing? The first sign lives in a very specific gap, the space between a message that felt warm, thoughtful, maybe even a little vulnerable, and the one that follows it, shorter, later, flatter, as if it came from someone else entirely. You've likely felt this and blamed yourself for noticing it, wondering if you're reading too much into a few words, or not enough words. But there is nothing imagined about this shift, and there is nothing malicious about it either. What you're witnessing is the honest report of a nervous system that has quietly finished doing what it felt obligated to do. Think of it like a stage light, held up bright and steady only long enough for the photo to be taken, only long enough for the moment that required it. Once that moment passes, the light doesn't stay lifted out of cruelty. It simply wasn't built to stay lifted without ongoing effort behind it, and effort, unlike intention, cannot be faked indefinitely. This is the part that matters more than any single sentence someone sends you. The presence of warmth once proves very little on its own. Almost anyone can offer warmth for a moment, in a message, in a good mood, in a burst of guilt or nostalgia. What actually builds trust, real trust, the kind your body can finally rest into, is consistency of that effort across time, not its brief appearance when it's convenient or expected. A single kind message is a data point. It is not a pattern. And here is the distinction that changes everything once you really absorb it. Intention and capacity are not the same thing. Someone can intend to be present, can even mean it in the moment they type it, and still lack the capacity to sustain that presence once the initial reason for reaching out has passed. This isn't about assigning blame or deciding someone is bad for it. It's about recognizing, calmly and clearly, what a collapse in effort is actually telling you. That whatever prompted the first message, whether it was guilt, longing, obligation, or genuine feeling, wasn't strong enough on its own to carry itself into the next one. That's not a verdict on your worth. It's information about their bandwidth in this particular moment of their life. And once you can see effort clearly, without needing it explained away or excused, there's a second signal sitting right beside it, one that speaks just as loudly, and it isn't found in what they said at all. It's found in when they said it. You already know the exact length of that gap, probably down to the hour, and you've likely spent more time explaining it away than you'd like to admit, telling yourself they're busy, they're tired, life got in the way, anything that keeps the explanation kind and simple. But the space between a first message and a second one is rarely just about time. It's about ambivalence, the quiet internal tug-of-war between wanting to move closer and needing to pull back, and that tug-of-war leaves a signature you can actually feel, even when you can't name it. This has a shape in psychology, and it's called approach avoidance, the pattern of reaching towards something genuinely wanted while simultaneously retreating from the exposure that wanting requires. Someone reaches out because some real part of them missed you, thought of you, felt the pull of unfinished connection. That reach is often sincere, but the moment it lands, the moment it's real and returned and no longer just a private thought, something else activates. A fear that has very little to do with you and everything to do with what closeness has cost them before. Being truly seen requires being truly reachable, and for a mind that equates closeness with danger or vulnerability with losing itself entirely, that reachability can feel less like intimacy and more like exposure. This is sometimes called fear of engulfment, the anxious sense that closeness might consume rather than complete, and it doesn't announce itself with words. It shows up as delay, as distance, as a pause that stretches far longer than logistics would ever explain. You are not wrong for noticing this. You are not overanalyzing by feeling the difference between an eager reply and a reluctant one. Your sensitivity to timing isn't a flaw to be corrected. It's a form of attunement, picking up on hesitation long before it's ever spoken aloud. And here is the reframe that matters most. That hesitation was never a referendum on whether you're worth reaching for. It's a reflection of their own relationship with closeness, shaped long before you ever entered the picture, a defense their mind built to protect itself from feeling too deeply seen, too quickly, by anyone. So when timing shifts, when the pause between messages grows heavier than it should, what you're really sensing is their fear, not your unworthiness. But fear alone doesn't tell you the whole story. There's one more layer beneath it, quieter than fear, and in many ways more revealing, because it isn't about what someone is afraid of at all. It's about what they actually have the capacity to give you right now. There is a quiet detail most people never think to look for, and it is, in many ways, the most telling one of all. It isn't found in what was said. It's found in what wasn't asked. Genuine emotional availability rarely announces itself with grand gestures. It shows up in something far smaller and far more revealing. A question, a thread picked back up, a small sign that someone wanted to know more, not just to reply, but to actually understand. This absence isn't cruelty, and it isn't proof that you said something wrong or gave them nothing worth asking about. It's a reflection of something called emotional bandwidth, the very real, very limited capacity a person has, in any given season of their life, to hold someone else's inner world alongside their own. Curiosity requires bandwidth. It requires enough internal space to wonder about another person without that wondering feeling like a burden. When that space is missing, when someone is depleted, distracted, or quietly overwhelmed by their own unresolved things, curiosity is often the very first thing to disappear, long before warmth does, long before effort does entirely. Here is where so many people misread this signal, and it's worth naming clearly. This is not a measurement of your worth. It is a measurement of their availability. When someone lacks the capacity to be curious about you, it becomes painfully easy to turn that lack inward, to assume you weren't interesting enough, open enough, easy enough to want to know. That interpretation is a projection, mistaking someone else's limitation for evidence of your own inadequacy, and it is almost never accurate. The psychological skill someone needs to hold another person's thoughts and feelings in mind, to genuinely wonder about them, is called mentalizing, and it isn't something everyone can access equally at every point in their life. Its absence says far more about where they are than about who you are. So when you notice these three signs together, the fading effort, the heavier pause, the missing question, you are not collecting proof that you are hard to love. You are collecting information about someone's current capacity to show up. And underneath all three signs, once you see them clearly, side by side, there is one deeper truth trying to reach you, a truth that has less to do with them than you might expect, and far more to do with what you were actually capable of seeing all along. Here is the truth waiting underneath everything we've just walked through, and it may land more gently than you expect. That second message was never a test you failed to interpret correctly. You didn't miss some hidden code, some clever subtext you should have caught sooner. The information was never hidden from you at all. It was given freely, plainly, in the fading effort, the lengthening pause, the absent question, and you saw every bit of it. You've spent so long believing you were bad at reading people, too anxious, too suspicious, too quick to assume the worst, when in reality, you were reading them with remarkable accuracy the entire time. What you doubted wasn't your perception. It was your right to trust it, because trusting it meant accepting something painful, and hope is a powerful thing to argue against. So you talk yourself out of what you already knew, again and again, not because you're foolish, but because some part of you was still hoping the pattern might change if you just waited a little longer, watched a little closer, gave a little more benefit of the doubt. That's not weakness. That's love, misdirected toward denial instead of clarity. But here is the realization that changes everything from this point forward. The clarity you needed was never missing. It was available to you from the very first fading reply, the very first delayed reply, the very first message that came back a little too empty. You didn't need more information. You needed permission to believe what you were already seeing, instead of what you were still hoping for. And once you give yourself that permission, something remarkable happens. The anxious spiral of rereading, decoding, and doubting begins to quiet, not because the outcome changed, but because you stopped needing the outcome to explain your own perception back to you. That clarity, once claimed, deserves to be protected, not just felt in a single peaceful moment, but carried forward, guarded gently. So you never again talk yourself out of what you already, quietly, know. Now that this clarity belongs to you, it's worth being honest about what it's actually asking of you, because it isn't asking you to punish anyone, or to close your heart, or to treat every fading reply as proof that love itself is unsafe. That would only trade one kind of pain for another. What this clarity asks for is far quieter than that, and far more mature. It asks you to stop performing emotional labor in places that aren't reciprocating it, to stop reaching further than you're being met, to stop mistaking your own generosity for evidence that the connection is balanced. There is an important difference between compassion and self-abandonment, and it's easy to blur the two when you care deeply. Compassion is being able to understand why someone withdraws, recognizing their fear, their bandwidth, their own unfinished history, without needing to punish them for it. Self-abandonment is something else entirely. It's ignoring what that withdrawal costs you, again and again, in the name of being understanding, patient, easy to love. You can hold compassion for someone's limitations and still refuse to shrink yourself around them. Those two things are not in conflict. This is where something called differentiation becomes essential, the ability to stay emotionally connected to someone while still remaining fully, separately yourself, your needs intact, your standards intact, your sense of worth not dependent on their consistency. Healthy boundaries were never about walls or ultimatums. They're simply the quiet decision to match effort instead of chasing it, to let someone's actions set the pace instead of your longing setting it for them. There is no need for a dramatic conversation, no need for proving a point. Just a calm, internal recalibration, giving what is met, and gently withholding what isn't, without guilt, without explanation. This isn't coldness. It's self-respect wearing a very quiet outfit. And the more naturally this becomes your default, the less often you'll find yourself back in that anxious loop of rereading and doubting, because you'll already be living from a steadier place, one that no longer requires someone else's clarity to feel like your own. There is something worth saying plainly, especially now, after everything we've walked through together. What you've often called overthinking was never a wound to be fixed. It was attunement all along, a quiet, finely tuned sensitivity to pattern, to timing, to the subtle difference between presence and performance, and that sensitivity, once trusted instead of doubted, stops being a source of anxiety and becomes something far more valuable, a compass. A compass doesn't panic when it senses direction. It simply knows, calmly, without needing to argue itself into certainty. That's what this awareness becomes for you from here forward. Not a heightened fear of being hurt again, but a steady, internal knowing that quietly protects you without needing to be loud about it. Think about who this makes you, moving forward. Someone who can read a pattern accurately won't be so easily fooled by a single warm message after long silence. Won't confuse a moment of effort for a return of consistency. Won't mistake performance for the real, sustained presence that real love actually requires. You've earned this discernment, not through bitterness, but through paying close, painful attention and choosing to finally trust what that attention revealed. That is not a small thing. That is often exactly how someone grows into a steadier, more secure way of loving, not by avoiding connection, but by finally being able to recognize the real thing when it arrives, because you'll know how it differs from everything that only resembled it. And maybe the most quietly powerful part of all this is simple. Your peace no longer needs to depend on decoding someone else's silence. You don't need the full explanation for every pause, every gap, every unanswered message, because your sense of self isn't waiting on the other side of their clarity anymore. It lives inside you now, steady, grounded, already whole. If this found you at the right moment, let it sit with you a little longer, not as an answer to force, but as a quiet truth to simply carry forward.